Hello friends. Well, I am Sunil Ranjan and I am an English teacher. Now here in this video, I have come up with Tradition and the Individual Talent by T.S. Eliot, and I will explain point-wise, and if you write your answers in points, you will be scoring high marks in your examination. So that is the technique of writing an answer, because in the examination hall you get only 3 hours to write all the answers. So you have to be careful and intelligent enough to give the time slot to every answer that you write. Now, beginning here, Tradition and the Individual Talent by T.S. Eliot. In his essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, T.S. Eliot says that it is the poet's treatment of their position within the historical context of literature that demonstrates their talent. He says that the poets should apply their knowledge of the past writers to highlight their impact upon their work. He states that in the works of poets, there is presence of the ideas of the past poets which are expressed very clearly. Now, the first point here, that was introduction. Now, the first point is emphasis on tradition. So, you may remember or you may note it down. Because if you write point-wise, I tell you again, you will be scoring very good marks. So, the first point is emphasis on tradition. Eliot says that following the tradition does not mean imitating, as it will then be repetition in a new way. To him, tradition is gained by knowing the literature of the past and being aware of its valuable contents and techniques. According to him, the poet should be aware of the literary tradition dating back to the classics. He says that tradition is the collected wisdom and experience of literature through the ages and is essential for great achievements in poetry. So, this is the end of the first point. The second point is isolation and comparison. I repeat, isolation and comparison. Now here, Eliot says that no writer or literature is of any value if it remains isolated. A work of literature can be judged only when it is compared to the works of the past. He believes that tradition is constantly changing due to the appearance of new literary works. He says that the writer should have the past in mind while conforming to literary tradition and modifying his work. Modern writers add meaning to the traditional texts by incorporating their influence upon their work. He admits that a new work of art, when original, modifies the literary tradition in a small way. The relationship between past and present is not one way. The present can change the past just as the past modifies the present. Now the next point, that is critical examination of the past. I repeat, critical examination of the past. Now here I go. Eliot acknowledges that complete knowledge of the past would be impossible. In order to understand deep meaning of tradition, one must critically examine the past and focus on works of art that are considered to be of high value. While doing so, one must be critically aware of trends and techniques of a particular age, movement, and the writer, and have the ability to recognize its deviation. So this is the second point. And now coming to the next point, awareness of past and present. So I repeat, awareness of past and present. A writer with a good sense of tradition should be aware that the main literary trends do not come from the most recognized poets only, but they must also be aware of trends set by lesser known poets. Eliot says that although the work of present poets is compared and contrasted to poets of the past, it does not determine whether the work of the present is better than the work of the past, as standards change over time. The comparison is made in order to analyze the new work and create a deeper understanding of the text. Through this comparison only, the traditional and the individual elements can be determined. So here I come to the end of this point. Now the next point is qualitative improvement of art. I repeat, qualitative improvement of art. Eliot says that art never improves and argues that despite changes in thinking, great writers such as Shakespeare and Homer remain relevant. He recognizes that artists work with different materials and their art is a product of different periods of history. So it is impossible to measure a qualitative improvement in any school of art. Now, coming to the next point. Level of knowledge. I repeat, level of knowledge. So here, Eliot is well aware that questions will be asked about the great level of knowledge that is required of any poet in order to meet his understanding of tradition. The essay will be criticized on the basis of the level of education that is required. There are great poets who did not have much higher level. Eliot argues that it should be the duty of every poet to build their knowledge of the past while making their career. He believes that knowledge of tradition encourages and enriches the poet's ability to write great work. Now, the next point is objectivity and maturity. I repeat, objectivity and maturity. Eliot says that at the start of his career, the poet begins to assert his individuality, but he notes that it is the sign of an immature poet. As they write, they should lose the sense of their personality within the work they create. They should become objective with maturity. Therefore, the relevance lies in the poet's delivery of literary tradition. Now, the next point. Accomplishment of the artist. I repeat, accomplishment of the artist. Eliot notes the necessity of new situations and emotions experienced by the poets without any changes in their expression. He states that the more accomplished the artist is, the more separate he will be, who suffers and the one who creates. He notes that the personality of the poet should not be expressed in their work, but should remain unchanged by external factors. Now, the next point is range of feelings and emotions. I repeat, range of feelings and emotions. Now, Eliot says that poetry may be formed from singular or multiple feelings, emotions, or a combination of the two. He says that poetry is the setting of emotions and feelings rather than inspiration. He believes that the quality of the poetry is not determined by the intensity of feelings or emotions, but the intensity of the process of creating and arranging those feelings as part of poetic composition. The more is the pressure involved in the creative process, the better is the quality of the literary piece. Eliot notes the difference between personal emotions of the poet and the emotion of poetry itself. While personal emotions may be simple, their expression may be complex. While it is not the role of the poet to express new emotions, the poet should express ordinary emotions in new ways. Now, coming to the next point. Rejection of Wordsworth's theory of poetry. I repeat, rejection of Wordsworth's theory of poetry. Eliot rejects Wordsworth's theory of poetry that it is emotions recollected in tranquility. He believes that the composition of poetry does not require emotion, recollection, or tranquility. He says that original poetry results from concentration on experiences. He argues that such concentration should not be deliberate but passive. Poetry should be an escape from the poet. Eliot does not deny the poet's personality but declares that the impersonality required to create good poetry can only be achieved when the poet surrenders himself to the poetry he creates. Now, coming to the next point. Place of tradition in literature. I repeat, place of tradition in literature. So here I begin. Eliot is of the view that the poet is capable only of surrendering himself to his work if he has acquired a good understanding of tradition. The poet should be conscious not only of his position within the literary principles of the past, but also where they belong in the literature of the present and how his poetry is relevant to the world in which it is created. Now, coming to the next point, function of poetry, education and entertainment. I repeat, function of poetry dash education and entertainment. Now, Eliot believes that poetry should educate as well as entertain. His essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, sets out rules to be a great poet. His principles resemble some elements of the classics when he accepts their relevance as alluding to classical poets somehow improves the quality of poetry. Now the next point is novel treatment. Novel means new. So novel treatment. While Eliot argues for originality, he also takes into account the literature of the past. Ezra Pound's statement, "Make it new," echoes the same argument as it is not possible to make something completely original. Thus, Eliot suggests to take the traditional and make it appear new by attributing new meanings to it. Eliot does not allow for the expression of new emotions as it sets limits on the originality and uniqueness of poetry. While he allows for originality in the way in which poets react and respond to the literary and historic tradition, he limits free expression of the poet's individuality. Now, the last point, that is an assessment. So, the heading is Flaws in Eliot's essay. So, the problems, the mistakes, a critical appreciation of Eliot's essay. So, the heading goes Flaws in Eliot's essay. While the poets are often influenced by the literature written in the past, they must feel completely free to express new ideas and emotions. The ideas expressed in his essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, discourages poets who are less educated and could discourage naturally talented poets from creating truly unique poems. The essay is flawed as it fails to allow creative wisdom that is vital to literature. Eliot places rigidity of rules that do not allow freedom of expression in literature that is so essential to allow creativity to move along with time. Eliot argues that the experienced and mature poets have elements of literary tradition in their work. Eliot's work, The Waste Land itself, is full of literary allusions, and being original, it fits well with his arguments. However, emotions, personality, and the personal experience of T.S. Eliot are disguised within his poem and become clear when studied from a biographical angle. Through his poem The Waste Land, Eliot often attempts to put the ideas of tradition and the individual talent into practice, but he often fails to separate his personal experience from the creative process of writing poetry. So friends, here I come to the end of this topic, and if you have subscribed to my channel, thank you very much. And if you haven't, and if you choose to subscribe, I promise that I'll be coming up with fine and quality videos for you from time to time. Thank you.